Hello students, in today's lecture we are going to study about thermal pollution. So thermal pollution can be defined as presence of waste heat in the water which can cause undesirable changes in the natural environment. So as we know, the meaning of thermal means the meaning of thermal is heat. So heat can be act as a pollutant which can cause pollution. Of course, the environment or the source which is being polluted is mostly the water. So the thermal pollution can be observed or can be seen in aquatic environment or the water. So the excessive heat can be act as a pollutant. So as per the definition of pollution, that any natural component is present in excessive amount that can be act as a pollutant. So in this case, the waste heat, it is acting as a pollutant. That's why that heat is causing thermal pollution. Now, what are the causes of thermal pollution? So heat producing industries like power plant, nuclear power plant, refineries, steel mills, etc. are the major sources of thermal pollution. That means where the actual processes of maybe nuclear reactions, okay, in the nuclear power plant, or where the radioactive material is handled. Along with that, the factories or the industries where the work or any process is done at a very high temperature, that can be considered as a source of thermal pollution. So power plants utilizes only one third of energy provided by fossil fuels for their operations. Remaining two-thirds is generated loss in the form of heat to the water used for cooling. So that is a big loss of energy. Along with that, that is a big source of thermal pollution. So cold water generally is drawn from some nearby water body, pass through the plant and return to the same water body with temperature 10 to 16 degree higher than the initial temperature. So what they do, the cold water is taken out or taken from the nearby water body. Okay, because to cool down the temperature, the easiest way is to wash with or to pour the water on anything. So that the same thing the industries or these resources are using. So cold water they drawn from nearby water body and they pass through the plant or any machineries, and again that water it is returned to the same water body. Now what happens during this process? The temperature of water increases by 10 to 16 degrees Celsius. So there are various consequences of this process. So excess of heat reaching such water body causes thermal pollution of water. What are the effects of thermal pollution? First one is dissolved oxygen content of water is decreased as the solubility of oxygen in the water is decreased at a high temperature. So dissolved oxygen, that means the certain amount of oxygen or the partial pressure of oxygen which is present in the aquatic ecosystem or the aquatic body at a given time. Now that content of water decreases. That means the oxygen solubility of the water decreases. So from air, the oxygen is soluble or getting dissolved inside the water, and that's how the oxygen is available in the aquatic ecosystem. Now, because of a high temperature, the solubility is getting affected. Now, what are the consequences if the dissolved oxygen content is less? Now, oxygen is we all know the oxygen is a primary component which is required for the any living organism for their survival or to maintain a metabolic basal metabolic rate. Now, as the solubility of oxygen decreases, that means the requirement of oxygen is increases. Okay, so already as we have studied, the oxygen required for many living things. That's why it is called as a biological oxygen demand. That means particular percentage of oxygen or particular concentration of oxygen is required to the water body for the survival. Now, as the dissolved oxygen content is less, then it is affecting the living thing or the ecosystem which is living in that aquatic ecosystem or able to survive in a particular water body. So the oxygen content is less. That means any species which is very sensitive to particular partial pressure of oxygen, then that species won't be able to survive if there is a high BOD, that is high biological oxygen demand. Along with that, that and oxygen is required for survival. Okay, and at a high temperature, that oxygen concentration it changes. Now, this oxygen and temperature are involved to maintain the basic metabolic rate. Okay. Next point is high temperature becomes a barrier for oxygen penetration in deep cold waters. So as we know that it is affecting the solubility, that means it is acting as a barrier that oxygen is not able to dissolve or penetrate inside the water body. Toxicity of pesticides, detergents, and chemicals in the effluents increases with the increase in temperature. So, if with the water, that hot water, sometimes pollutants may get mixed. Okay, these are pesticides, detergent, and chemicals. So, this affects with that solubility is affected with the increased temperature. And as we know, these toxicants when get involved or sorry when get soluble in the any aquatic body, okay, that is the invitation for algal bloom, and as the algal bloom appears it will spread, and that will be a competition for oxygen with the present organisms which are in the that aquatic body or any specific water body. And the overall phenomena it is called as a eutrophication. The composition of flora and fauna changes because the species sensitive to increased temperature due to thermal shock will be replaced by thermal tolerant species. That means in any pond or any lake, suppose there is a very rare species which is sensitive for the temperature change or which is specialized to a particular temperature. Now, what do you mean the species becomes specialized or the specialized species? That means at a given temperature or at any given criteria, that's only that given criteria, species is able to survive. For example, any bird which is which feeding or which can survive only by feeding particular plant fruit. Okay. For example, dodo, which they now become extinct. Okay, because they were dependent on the dodo plant. Okay, or any species which can or any plant species we know that is dependent on the soil pH. Likewise, there are some of the species who are completely dependent on the particular temperature. That means the survival is only possible at particular temperature. So if any kind of a species is present in a pond or any specialized ecosystem, in that case, this return water, which is having a high temperature, that will be act as a thermal shock. That means that plant won't be able to survive. Now suppose the another case that the species is tolerant. That means species is able to survive in any temperature, even if we fluctuate that temperature, or even if we observe any change in that temperature, still that species is able to survive. That may be any animal or plant. So though that species is not specialized, that means can survive at any given temperature. So what is the result of this? Not the result, sorry. What is the consequence of this thing? That means this species which is tolerant can become dominant, can take a charge of all that ecosystem. And as we know which one is the dominant, the reproductive rate is higher and the survival rate will be higher. Okay. So that means they are fit at that condition. In this case, the great loss is we can lose any specialized or the very rare species of either plant or any flower or any aquatic animal. And as we know, the loss of any uh, fauna or flora will be will be result into that is the loss of ecosystem, right? Because any species can act as a key factor or the key species, okay, or more probably we can say keystone species. So to maintain the equilibrium, it is the all species are important in the environment. Metabolic, the next point is metabolic activities of aquatic organisms increase at a high temperature and require more oxygen, whereas oxygen level falls under thermal pollution. So the same what we have discussed, the oxygen is required or it is associated with a metabolic activity. So as the oxygen concentration drops down or the level falls because of the thermal pollution, the thing is going to affect on the metabolic rate of different organisms which are living in an aquatic body or the aquatic ecosystem. Now, why to maintain metabolic activity or the metabolic rate? Because the metabolic rate is required not only for day-to-day activities, but it is hampering different different systems. Okay. For example, there is a great effect which you can observe on the reproductive system, on hormonal system. Likewise, the metabolic activities are important for the human body or any other organism's body. Next point is discharge of heated water near the shores can disturb spawning and can even kill young fishes. So discharge of heated water near the shores. Okay? That means the outlet or any small hub-like structure which is present near the seashore, okay, which is a sub part of the main factory or the main industry, okay, which is operated by at the seashore, okay. And if we discharge this heated water near the shore, that can disturb spawning, that means egg laying, and even can even kill young fishes. That means the high temperature it is harmful for eggs and for the young fishes also. And as we know, the no young ones, then how can genes pass into a next generation? How can descendants will be formed? Right? So fish migration, next point is fish migration is affected due to formation of various thermal zones. So fish migration, that means fish migrate from one water body to another water body through aquatic route only, either for reproduction, that means in the search of mate, okay, or either because of the temperature fluctuation or the change in climatic conditions. In that case, fishes do migrate. Now, if this getting affected, then it is going to hamper the reproductive behavior of the fish, any survival instinct of the fish. So if the any particular fish species which is acting as a which is playing a very good role in the ecosystem, then this will be a great risk for that ecosystem, or that will be a great loss for the ecosystem. Now how can we control thermal pollution? We have seen in the that we have seen these are the sources, or what can be a effects can be observed or because of thermal pollution. Now we can see how can we control thermal pollution. The following methods can be employed for control of thermal pollution. So there are three main methods which are generally practices. The first one is cooling ponds, the next one is spray pond, and third one is cooling towers. The first one is cooling ponds. So water from condensers is stored in ponds. Here natural stored in ponds. Here natural evaporation cools the water, which can then be recirculated or discharged in nearby water body. So what is the actually thing? Okay. So that is dissipation of heat by cooling pond. So they collect the water from nearby pond. So if you observe, there is a condenser and cooling pond. Okay. In the next diagram, you can observe here river. Again, there is a condenser and cooling pond. So what they actually do, water from condensers is stored in ponds. Condenser stored in ponds, that is cooling ponds. Then here natural evaporation cools the water, which can then be recirculated and discharged in nearby water body. Okay, so because of a condensation, that water gets cooled or the cool down, and again that water can be discharged into nearby water body. So that is the main thing, or the main process which is done in the cooling ponds. Okay. Now the next is spray ponds. The water from condenser is received in a spray pond. Here water is sprayed through nozzle where fine droplets are formed. Heat from these fine droplets is dissipated through the atmosphere. So what you can observe here is the sprayers, okay, and condenser. That means like sprinklers are throwing water. Likewise, the sprayers are throwing water in the fine droplets in the environment or in the atmosphere. And by this way, the thermal dissipation takes place. That means heat lost in the environment. Now, what they do after the cooling that water, they are again releasing or recirculating that water in the river or any different water body. That is a spray ponds. What is the third technique that is called as a cooling towers? So wet cooling towers, what it is, hot water is sprayed over baffles. Okay. So cool air entering from sides take away to the heat and cools the water. This cool water can be recycled or discharged. So the large amount the large amount of water is lost through evaporation, and in the vicinity of wet cooling tower, extensive fog is formed, which is not good for environment and causes damage to vegetation. So what is the actual working? This diagram, that is upper diagram, if you observe, this one is the tower. Okay. Along with that, what you can observe, there is a inlet or the way through which hot water is entering in the tower. Below that, you can observe there is a cool air inlet. So air is blown inside that tower, and from one side hot water is coming. So because of this process, the condensation takes place. Okay, so that may be passed through as a steam. Okay? And because of condensation, or the temperature is maintained in a such a way that water becomes cool, okay, or the temperature drops down. Afterwards, they collect that cool water and reuse, or either send it to, or discharge into different water body or the same water body. The next one is dry cooling tower. The heated water flows in a system of pipes. Air is passed over these hot pipes with fans. There is no water loss in this method, but installation and operation cost of dry cooling tower is many times higher than wet cooling tower. So instead of using that water flow directly, okay, what they have done, or what they usually do, the pipe is used. Okay, so from one end, hot water is coming. From one end, that is cool air inlet, that can be you observe. So cool air is coming inside, and below that there is a fan for the circulation of air. So as the wind is, or sorry, air is flowing from this way, okay, that is through this pipe, the temperature drops down, okay, and the warm air is coming out through this tower. That is called as a dry cooling tower. Okay, why? Because there is not any kind of condensation, or the steam is formed in this method. Okay, that's so it is called as a dry cooling tower. But what is the difference between dry and there is a difference between dry and wet cooling tower. So wet cooling tower, there is not any kind of pipe is involved for the cooling down the water. Along with that, the fog is formed in the cooling wet cooling tower. So that will be the fog, as we know, that is the different cases with what we have learned. That is, if there is a smoke, it can get mixed with the smoke, and that will form a smog. Okay. Now this fog, it is causing damage to vegetation, because the air breathing channels, or the pores, that is we call it the stomata. Okay, that may get affected because of the uh, wet tar. Okay, so that was about thermal pollution. So what is the thermal pollution? It is caused because of the waste heat produced, and waste heat is discharged in the water, or any kind of abiotic factor which can cause undesirable changes in natural environment. And what are the causes? Thermal power plant, nuclear power plant, refineries, and steel mills, and many other different things. For example, fossil fuel. Okay. Then we have seen what are the effects. That is, dissolved oxygen content is very less. That means VOD is increased. Then, if there is any toxic components, or the pollutant which is present, or they may get in the body because of this transfer of water. Okay, then it will be act as the pollutant, or the toxicant for the aquatic ecosystem. Then, if there is any sensitive species, may get, or may die, or may become extinct, affecting on metabolic rate, affecting on, or there's a great effect on spawning and kill young ones, and affecting fish migration. There are three methods by which we can control thermal pollution: by cooling ponds, spray pond, and cooling towers. So that was about, that is about thermal pollution.